Porto e Mar, a Tribuna. Oferecimento AMA, Associação Comercial de Santos. Bauline, Concais, Ecoporto Santos, Eldorado Brasil, Praticagem São Paulo e San Marco Advogados.
Bom, senhor Francisco, já são 3 horas da tarde aqui no Brasil.
Sim.
8 horas da noite, não? Aí...
8 horas, sim.
8 horas. Bom, vamos dar início então ao nosso terceiro webinar. Inicialmente vou apresentar a todos aqui a proposta dessa terceira edição do webinar Porto e Mar 2020. O Grupo Tribuna tem realizado, desde o início desse período de pandemia, tem dado prosseguimento ao seu projeto Porto e Mar 2020 de debater os principais tópicos, os principais desafios do setor portuário, quer nacional, quer internacional. E com esse objetivo, nós passamos a realizar uma série de webinários falando com autoridades nacionais, agora passamos também a tratar com autoridades internacionais sobre como o setor portuário, de uma maneira geral, está lidando com a pandemia do Covid-19, com seus impactos, tanto nas operações portuárias quanto no próprio comércio exterior, na eventual redução desse comércio exterior, quais as soluções que têm sido apresentadas, quais os maiores problemas enfrentados e as expectativas para sair desse cenário, como o setor portuário sairá desse cenário. Com esse objetivo, com esses temas vão voltar a ser debatidos hoje, dessa vez com o convidado deste terceiro webinário, o webinar Porto e Mar 2020, que é o presidente da Associação Internacional para a Infraestrutura do Transporte Aquaviário, a PIANC, o senhor Francisco Esteban Leffler. Para facilitar o nosso webinar, todo ele vai ser feito em inglês, não é, senhor Francisco? Acredito que assim, we'll talk. I'm presenting the main objectives, Mr. Francisco, of our webinar. And what are our main objectives with this webinar and the topics that we'll discuss. É claro que todos que estão nos assistindo podem participar enviando perguntas que depois vão ser feitas ao Sr. Francisco. Inicialmente, uma breve apresentação. A PIANC é um dos principais órgãos internacionais do setor portuário, voltado principalmente para debater normas e orientações em relação a design, planejamento, construção e operação de portos e de infraestruturas de transporte marítimo. Inclusive, é uma entidade com mais de 100 anos e que está presente e tem representações em vários países do mundo, inclusive no Brasil. Aqui no Brasil, a representação dela ocorre através da ANTAQ, a Agência Nacional de Transportes Aquaviários. E é com base nesse expertise da PIANC que a gente vai buscar explorar que visão, como é que essa entidade está vendo hoje a pandemia do Covid-19 e seus efeitos no setor portuário. Mais uma vez, eu só esclareço que para facilitar a nossa comunicação, todo esse webinário vai ser em inglês. Mr. Francisco, again, it's a pleasure to have you here at the third webinar Porto e Mar 2020, promoted by the Tribuna Group. And again, thank you for your participation.
Well, I appreciate very much the invitation of the prestigious Grupo Tribuna, and it is for me a pleasure and an honor to be in contact with the port stakeholders and the ports in Brazil. That's a clear partner of PIANC. We would like just to improve our relation with Brazil and have more participation of Brazilian specialists in our working groups, in our commissions, and at the same time providing to Brazil the benefits of sharing all this knowledge that we have in PIANC with the best specialists in the world. So I apologize because my Portuguese is very bad, and we need to have this webinar in English.
Mm-hmm. No problem at all. Mr. Francisco, in a recent article published by PIANC last month, the organization said that the COVID pandemic has a worldwide effect. albeit with time varying spatial distribution in terms of intensity and effects. But the main impacts are on operation. How is the port sector dealing with the COVID pandemic?
Well, at present, the port system is dealing with the very short-term challenges. It's trying to adapt with a great success to the situation. But as our main feature in Bianchi is providing guidelines and good practice. So we think that once this is going on, once we have enough information, we can gather all this information, analyze it, and provide for the future better tools to assess this pandemic amongst the emergency and contingency plans of ports. The question is that it is a very, very specific topic. The variability with geography and time is quite a feature of the port system. The port systems, at the very end, the nodes of the logistic chains at the ports. And they are connected with links seawards and landwards. What happens? As the pandemic itself is propagating throughout the world, so it is varying in geography, and the evolution inside each country is also varying in time, the ports are facing their changes in their own countries, their own hinterland, and the changes in the connecting nodes in the other ports where they are connected with the maritime routes. So it's let's say it's quite a dynamic situation of variation that comes in the first stage with the health and sanitary restrictive measures, with the sudden need to import and export. Some countries import, some countries export due to the different needs. The essential goods, mainly we're talking about medical equipment and supplies, and also critical food products for many other countries. Also, a change in the availability of the inland logistic chains. So there are a full disruption of the logistic chains, both seawards and landwards. And that generates a very complex situation. That's a reduction in available truck transport. There's also a reduction in demand of standard cargoes. For instance, the car terminals are full of cars because of the lowering of the demand and the lack of availability of inland transportation. Also, there are new border checks, so crossing borders in land transport. It's also a blockage in the disruption in the logistics, several pressures in the storage and warehousing capacity. That adds on to the special call procedures for the vessels calling at the ports, and with the oscillation in general reduction of the availability of port services and workforce. That's a complex situation, really. That has a clear implication in operations today, but the physical support of the operation is infrastructure. Infrastructure has a very long cycle from the conception planning to the commissioning. So conception, designing, constructing, operating, adapting, etc. And these lessons that have to be learned from this crisis will no doubt translate into operational requirements, of course, but also in infrastructural requirements. I think that there will be a post-COVID new issues. And it is obviously a field for Bianchi in the future to analyze what happens, to integrate this into the challenges. Later we will be able just to compare this with other threats to the port system.
Mm-hmm. And you have said about the new issues in this post-pandemic, after this pandemic crisis, and we'll talk more about that in some time. But first of all, considering the main ports in the world, what are the most affected, and why was that?
Well, the World Port Sustainability Program of IIPH is now publishing a weekly report, Port Economic Impact Barometer, based on surveying ports. And it is very clear that the impact is quite different from place to place and from port to port, because it also depends on the composition of the cargoes that are handled in each port. I think we can talk about the disruption in container transit, the disruption in general cargo. They are different among ports, but have really common factors. So disruption depends on the situation I told you of the evolution of the pressure of the links landward and seaward. Also, where the ports are connected, requirements of the hinterland, and also connection to the inland communication lines through trucking, railways, and inland barges.
So ports that depends more in its inland connections are more affected than the ones that the hub ports that most deals with the transshipment of the cargo.
Well, let's say ports that are so at the end of feeder lines that are connected to clear hinterlands have let's say a more short-term pressure, changing at the very short term. Hub ports have the main burden on hub ports is the lack of or the pressure on the storage capacity and warehousing capacity, because the cargo is concentrating in the hubs and it cannot get out until the receiving ports have the availability to send all that to the logistic chains in landwards.
In Europe, what are the ports most affected nowadays?
Well, in Europe, for instance, there are several traffics that are more affected than in other areas because of the composition. Which are most affected? I think it has been evolving during time. For instance, Italian ports have been affected because the pandemic has been strong. The Spanish ports happened more or less the same. But I think ports have been in general very successful in keeping the lifelines for main cargo, main emergency cargos open. I think really well, but not the best possible. Just to say, they reacted well to this changing pressure, this changing environment, this emergency situation. I think no blockage took place in the resilience was not visible, but luckily it was enough for what happened. And the European ports could handle this, but with a huge variation on many kinds of cargo. Also, it adds on other crises, like for instance, in the oil products, it adds on the crisis generated by the oil price. And so the burden on the capacity of storage of the ports has been very, very important. So it's adding also on the other factors.
And when Bianchi analyzes those ports that are more successful in maintaining its operations, what were the solutions implemented to guarantee those operations?
The solutions are many. I think we are too close in time just to have the solutions. This topic is alive because of this. IAPH is issuing every week a follow-up. And I think that we will not be ready to judge about the best practices until this crisis finishes and things go on. It's somehow it is similar like with the PM report we did in 2014 about the tsunami disaster in 2011 in Japan. We waited until we had enough information just to judge what happened, how was the reaction, and also to read our former report on tsunami design in the light of the reality of a really catastrophic event, tsunami. We're talking a lot in Bianco, of course, we deal with operation because infrastructure is nothing by itself. You have to consider it related to the operation or to the life of the ports. And it is very, very clear that we need information. We need to go thoroughly through that information, discuss it, forming a working group with experts, and from there derive the best practices for the future. However, there are some first lessons that are very, very clear. Of course, the first one is that pandemics should be included in the emergency and contingency planning of ports. Should be dealt as extreme climate events with a similar way to address them. They have something in common, like we will be able later to go through that, because it is at the very end, it's an extreme event, a low probability event, and in PIANC, in all the marine environment, we deal with storms, we deal with surges, we deal with many extreme events, and amongst them, the ones derived also from climate change. And there are some parallels that we can analyze further.
Yes, and when you talk about those first lessons that are already clear that should be learned about it, PIANC has considered the coronavirus outbreak as an extreme event, and as that, it defends that all the ports and the port administrations should be prepared or should plan for such an event. You said about the climate change, that's also another example of extreme event. And in Brazil, for an example, climate change is not a topic that demands or is answered with a lot of attention from the authorities or from the business, from the private sector. What are the reactions that you are seeing globally in the port sector with this kind of pandemic? Was there any kind of port that was at least prepared for such a scenario, or no? This scenario is so much unprecedented, so much surprising that no, there was any port or any terminal operator that even imagines such a thing?
Well, ports have been traditionally prepared for health issues, for quarantines, for controlled epidemics, but epidemics, that goes all throughout the world. In a globalized economy, this is the first time this happens. This is, in my opinion, this is a new kind of event. In order we can analyze, and we need to take a lot of conclusions, because this is completely new in the conditions it happened. See, standard health procedures in ports are very small for this. And obviously you cannot prepare for having continuous pandemics of this kind. We have to go back to concepts like resilience, like adaptation. And also we have to analyze one thing that's very important. The port is not the port by itself. The port is a node in the logistic chain, and the disruption and many of the problems that are coming to the ports come from the disruptions in the logistic chains. So at the same time, the solution should come from the logistic chain in full.
And can the ports participate in such a way that to decrease that kind of impact that they will suffer, to help the logistic chains in a way that the impact will be less felt than they are feeling nowadays?
Yes, of course. The ways once we can analyze all these topics, we have to set procedures for tackling with this kind of emergencies. It's quite similar, has some similarities with extreme weather events that can be related to climate change, like hurricanes Katrina or Sandy, with a huge impact in densely populated areas, where sometimes the coordination with the civilian authorities, with the government, with other agencies had to be set up from zero, and show real success cases and failure cases. And that's the main issue in emergency planning, is just to set the main procedures for tackling the challenge. For instance, we're talking about one topic. That's the saturation of storage capacity. Mm-hmm. Obviously, ports cannot get dimensioned for answering to the storage of a pandemic that can happen one every 30 years, every 100 years, we don't know. And then I think this topic has to be addressed by the full logistic chain. Just talking about storage capacity mobilization in the chain. Yes, what's the best contribution of all the elements? And the elements are the agents, are the industries, are the consumers, are all the stakeholders of the logistic chain. Something very important that has been shown very critical, that's setting specific procedures for critical supplies. Sometimes critical supplies had problems because of the procedures in port, of the border procedures. So in emergency situations, ports must be able to set emergency lines or fast lanes for critical goods, make available storage capacity for critical goods, be able to change the path from standard goods to critical situations. And all this has to be done with the analysis of extreme events, really. Low probability event, an event that has also some parallels with the climate change. They are both physical shocks, both have social and economic impact, and both propagate very fast. Also, they are non-stationary. Let's say the past probability distributions do not give enough information for future projections. So traditionally in ports, we design with a 100-year storm, or the 200-year storm, or 200-year flood, and we take that from the data in the past. Well, reality is showing that those distributions, statistic distributions, are not stationary, are changing with time. It is something that has nothing to do with the discussion whether climate change, what part of climate change is natural or artificial. It's simply a reality. So these distributions are changing, and now we realize that the past is not enough for having enough safe procedures, infrastructure, and operation systems. Also, they are non-linear. Both pandemics and climate change have a disproportional growth of impact with relatively slight growth. So the impact grows non-linearly. They are also risk multipliers, so they have effects in the financial system, healthcare system, real economy, in finance. So being able to come with this is something like weighing what's the cost of the crisis and the cost of prevention. Usually the cost of prevention is a very good business.
Yes.
And both have,
one of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, you can continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Both have also the same. They need an optimization of the short-term performance of all systems. So you need a fast reaction when it happens, and also you need to ensure a long-lasting resilience of the system. The systems after the main event takes place and the main challenge takes place must recover their capacities in the long term and be able in the long term to withstand similar challenges.
One of the lessons that Bianchi has stressed the most is the need for ports, especially port administrations and port operators, to be resilient, to have to explore its resilience. Resilience is even one of the main answers that Bianchi defends to how to deal with those extreme events. Well, in your vision and in your opinion, are the ports learning this lesson in Europe or in other continents? The ports are becoming more and more resilient, or are that kind of precaution some even more theoretical
No,
nowadays.
well, really, the searching resilience is now a target in many ports, also in the main ports in the world. It is in in PIAG we don't choose the topics of our working groups by ourselves in HQ. So our members, our corporate members, main port authorities, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Zeebrugge, Hamburg, etc., ask for topics to analyze and also the specialists. Resilience is today a requirement that comes from the structural world. Structural resilience comes from simply that, let's say, a structural element cannot have a catastrophic failure when the load grows a little bit on the design load, just to avoid catastrophic failure. Then the definition has been extended to many other concepts, and now it's essential in climate, essential in all handling of extreme events. This issue I quoted before, that the distribution of extreme events like storms, surges, etc., is not stationary. This puts the challenge of subjecting the port infrastructure to resilient tests. How would the breakwater respond with a storm higher than the design storm? That's an important question. And this concept of resilience is essential for, as I told, for all kinds of extreme events, because it is also the most modern definition came from the United Nations, is the ability to resile from, spring back from a shock. That's to suffer the shock and be able to recover in best conditions in very short time. So resilience is the character of withstanding an extraordinary event and being back again to service. So it is something, it's a quality that's essential. It's a subject of research now in almost all fields. Now, for instance, regarding climate change challenge, you have to work in two directions. One is the mitigation, that's lowering carbon emissions, etc. And that's obviously very important in reducing the artificial part of climate change. We can discuss if it's most, half, three quarters, only a minor part, but obviously that's an advance in sustainability. But the other part is something we cannot avoid, because even in the best hypothesis of the United Nations panel on climate change of the experts, we need to adapt to climate change, because climate change will bring, climate is changing, and there will be low probability events, and then we need to adapt and be resilient. For adaptation, we need, because other topic that's very important is that when you go to prognosis of climate change a long time, there's a big spread. Logically, you can be more able to predict accurately at the short term than at the long term. And a resilient planning is to phase the investment in such a way that the economic performance of this investment is sound, is clear, can be assessed.
Yes. And what do you think of this strategy of the Brazilian authorities? Is there any chance of success?
What strategy are you asking me for?
About the Brazilian authorities.
And regarding climate, regarding COVID, or regarding
no.
resilience?
No, regarding the coronavirus outbreak.
Regarding the coronavirus outbreak, well, there are many approaches in many countries. Some of them are more safe in the health sense, and others prioritize the economic, just to avoid the economic crisis or minimize the economic impact. So it's a question of choosing between two extremes in the midterm. Are all the countries' position? I think that there are some expectations regarding an outbreak in autumn, in the northern autumn, or several coming backs of the virus So I think we will not be able to judge what's the best practice until the end of the pandemics, really.
Okay, and well, nowadays in Europe, some countries are starting to lessen the restrictions for the population and also to begin a return to normal capacity and also normal activities.
Yeah.
How are the movement in ports in Europe nowadays?
Well, the ports have done a different approach because ports are extremely necessary, and the keeping the logistic capabilities is one of the main challenges. You have the short term, the short term reaction is just provide essential supplies, but restoration of the logistic chain is a priority. So the ports in general have been working, except in very few countries, have been working with a reduced workforce, obviously because of the impact, with some restrictions with the workforce related to distance, related to shifts, let's say with less performance. But ports have been always on the line because they are the real lifelines of economy. So they have been ready to provide their services as fast as possible. And the reaction have been adapting the procedures, but continue working.
Okay, and in this period that the workforce is beginning to return to its posts, have you noticed any kind of improvement in the port operations? We understand that port operations are considered an essential activity, especially in the pandemic period. But in this period now that the countries are beginning to return to a normal capacity, as normal as possible, of course. Yes. Do you notice any kind of improvement in the port operations?
Well, the port operation, the ports still have to go back to their normal. The port operation are still challenged by the limited restrictions in sanitary restriction in the logistic chains, restriction in having not so the dock workforce is not available 100% because some of them are victims of the pandemic. Some other procedures have had to be adapted. The core procedures are slower because safety and health are now a priority, and the ports are trying to perform as best they can with the tools they are having. Of course, the requirements of a more resilient operation for the future is something that it is obvious. In the port, in the future, they will need to develop new procedures for vessel calls and crew changes that can be adapted to emergency situations. And also, I think that this will be a big push in increasing accelerating the digitalization process in order to have a very robust procedures that can handle disruptions in the logistic chains, that can handle highly variable amounts of cargo, changes in the lines, changes in the port procedures. So it will come requirements for improving artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain, etc. And also this brings another burden on top of it. That's an increased cybersecurity in all port processes for lowering the vulnerability that's inherent to this event.
As we enter into this topic of the post-crisis scenario, in this process of the increase in digitalization and automation in the port sector, as we said, the port 4.0. It was also, that was a process that was beginning to be implemented. In some countries it was faster, in others slower, but it was in the ways. But do you see an increase in that speed after all this crisis? It will be a priority to the sector. No,
Yes, it's
reports.
I see in everything that's published by port authorities and by specialists in transport economy, the demand for accelerating digitalization is unanimous. So this is a very, very important part of the way ahead. So this comes also with requirements to infrastructure, requirements regarding port planning, and requirement for new operations that have to be more robust and they will be more resilient.
Well, in this process, in this faster process, do you have any worries? You see, sometimes when we analyze the digitalization, the automation, we also discuss, well, the social impacts of that kind of process, or even if the industry is prepared to answer to that new demand. Are we ready to faster digitalization, to a faster automation in the port sector?
Well, we have a more recent experience is that in many countries we have started, at least in our case in Spain, in 2 hours. We changed from working in offices surrounded by people to remote working and to increasing the digital processes in a huge, I couldn't believe this change could be so fast and so relevant.
Easily implemented.
Yeah, to be implemented. Then I think of course, the industrial capabilities and technical capabilities can be accelerated and will be accelerated because this is a market niche for the companies that work in the cyberspace. Regarding the social impact of this, unemployment, etc., it is something that needs to be handled with sensitivity, trying to change just to try to teach the workers, provide tools for developing skills for the new world and for changing the shift from more manual works to being near digital. Well, it is something that's a balance of developing skills and a balance of sensitivity.
In that subject, we have here a question from Mr. Alexandre Machado. COVID-19 has spurred technological innovations that are changing our world. Are ports ready to take advantage of these new opportunities, especially in the port sector? Is this a reality catalyzed by COVID-19?
Yes, I'm sure. Most advanced ports were really giving very significant steps in digitalization. I think let's say the delayed ports now they know they have to go ahead. Many of the port systems have launched in the last years R&D and innovation programs based on ports 4.0. So it is a movement that was taking place, and I think this coronavirus, this moment, this post-COVID society will accelerate all those processes that were really online. Main container carriers are already very automatized and digitalized, and this has to extend as much as possible. And this is the new society will be very different from the pre-COVID-19 society with a high technological content and probably with a lot more of uses as this kind of webinars and taking many planes for meeting 1 hour, 2 hours. There will be many changes, and the ports, I think they are ready because ports have talent. Port authorities and the port ecosystem, engineers, economists, planners, and the port authority managers, they have talent. They are a big critical mass for stepping ahead. And of course, the necessity is a logistic necessity, a necessity to be in the business. I know that ports will step ahead.
Well, the port sector was already developing some projects with blockchain and also IoT. It was even a reality. Even in Spain, some ports were already making the digitalization of all the logistic process. to make it, to increase its velocity and its efficiency. But also ports are essentially organizations that deals with other organizations, even with organizations in other countries that have also other realities, that lives other realities.
Yeah.
How do you see that relationship between ports that will be very, very digitalized with a strong process of automation, with ports that are making its first steps in that process? What will happen with the ports that are blind to this new scenario? What will happen to them?
Well, first of all, I think we have to go to history of the ports. Ports have been always gateways, not only for goods, but also for ideas, for exchanging with other cultures. Traditional port cities, the port quarters were the quarters where the people from other civilizations and other cultures were. In European ports, there were Chinese quarters, Arab quarters. That all made the people that was in trade with other countries. I mean, the ports are gateways for entering not only goods, but also ideas. So I think this will be a very contagious movement. Obviously, there are ports that are more reluctant, that are ports that have, let's say, a slave hinterland, and they know they are the required gateway, and are more reluctant to spend in improvement. But they will have to, because they will need to talk with their suppliers. And this talk will not be by telephone, but will be by blockchain and by other procedures. It will come through the terminals. I think this evolution is clear, and the ports are traditionally open-minded in the sense that they are gateways for ideas too.
And Mr. Francisco, in that kind of process, how do you see the ports in countries, as in Brazilian sector, that are beginning to develop that kind of technology? It's
I think that's a best opportunity possible. They don't have to commit the errors of the predecessors. So they can look to good examples, success examples. They have to exchange knowledge. And in this direction, I would say that PIANC is a good room for that, because we collect experts from all the port systems. PIANC members choose the topics to develop working groups. And I think with this kind of association, in this case as PIANC, are a very good opportunity for that. The question is that the ports that have not yet started have all available all the experience of the others, the good experience and the bad experience. It's for instance, it happens the same in infrastructure. A port that's starting to develop now can make an excellent planning. Will not face the problem of the old ports when containers exploded and started to move. There was a lack of space. The depth of the cables, the available surface for yards was insufficient. Container operation was inefficient, and they had to perform with a lot of constraints for the development. And with this question of automation and digitalization happens just the same. We have to look at that as opportunities.
Yes, and also the opportunity to not pay for the errors of others.
Yes, of course.
And in this scenario that you are describing, when do you think that we'll see this new port sector? It will take some years, a decade, or no? As you already stressed in one of your answers, you were surprised of how fast the Spanish society has adapted to this new working environment, to transfer all the activities from the office to home, and it was very fast, as you have already said. And in the port sector, that will be also a fast process.
I'm sure, because in other transport modes, in air transport, even in railways with high speed, the evolution has been very, very fast. And digital evolution does not require, for instance, if you have an infrastructure planning, there's a long time from the planning, designing, construction. There's a big cycle since you decide to build a container terminal until the cranes are there and the first box, the first ship full of boxes is coming to the place. With the digital world, transformation can be very, very fast.
Another question. Last week, PIANC has published a report, the report Resilience of the Maritime and Inland Waterborne Transport System.
Yes.
The test states that, and I quote, to successfully operate the maritime and inland waterborne transport system must be resilient, must have the capacity to anticipate and plan for disruptions, resist loss in operations, and or absorb the impact of disturbances, rapidly recover afterwards, and adapt.
Sorry? I lost the link. I lost the link for a couple of, for 30 seconds.
I was just quoting about
the PIANC report on resilience, yes.
Yes, and the importance of resilience. Of course, this report was not made considering the coronavirus outbreak. This report has been developed in the last months. But what are the main lessons that this report can give to ports to deal with the COVID pandemic?
Well, and really many of the tools are more or less the same, because if it's dealt like as an extreme event with a low probability catastrophic event with a huge impact that's widespread, is quite related to the climate change impacts that are analyzed in this resilience working group. And resilience is the same feature, the one that's required. Resiliency of the operation in case of a pandemic. Resiliency in capacity of storage. Doesn't mean, resilience doesn't mean they have to provide everything for all the worst case scenario with a very, very low probability. But at least you have the tools to come to the normal in short time and without losing capabilities. I think the conceptual tools are there, and in the other recently published PIANC report, also from 2020, on climate change adaptation. Also, the cycle of adaptation can be very well translated into the context of the pandemics. The first, setting the objectives that know ourselves, know the port knowing itself, identify the critical assets, critical operation, and critical systems regarding a catastrophe like this. The second stage, that would be the information on the challenge. In the case of this report, is focused on climate information. But in this case, in the other case, the information that has to be collected is the information that's been produced since February to the end of the pandemic. We will know what is the solicitation to the port system. Mm-hmm. Starting from there, it's using our available tools of analysis of risk analysis and vulnerability analysis and hazard analysis. Then we can cover a weakness and address them. And from that, develop the adaptation options. Obviously, taking into consideration the role of the port in the logistic chain. This is not something, the port is having many inputs that are coming from their links in the logistic chain. So it would be useless that the port thinks only himself and not look around for a system reaction to the pandemic. Like, for instance, regarding the Hurricane Sandy, for instance, it was not a challenge only for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Also, all the agencies had to intervene, the local transport system, because everything was connected. But the tools for addressing, at the beginning I said that there were some common features. If we go through the PIANC declaration on climate change that I presented in December in Madrid in COP25, in COP25 Chile, many of the requirements are are common. It's applied monitoring system and effective data management, strengthen the operational resilience by developing risk assessment, contingency plans, and warning, collaborate with energy and water suppliers, onboard transport providers, and others involved in the supply chain to understand interdependencies and reduce exposure to the risk, and also consider the combination of structural, operational, and institutional measures that can provide the necessary resilience to cope with this challenge.
Okay, Mr. Francisco, and as you have already said that the climate change, we have even a question here about that topic. It's from Mr. Rodrigo Marsh, and he asks how port operators and also inland waterways operators have to plan for the effects of climate change.
Well, they have to plan for adaptation. Let's say if the risk in climate change is having for an inland port operator a flood of X or Y level, I'm just simplifying. Is this procedure is performing a risk analysis and taking the appropriate measures. I think the PM report on adaptation has many case studies, and also the one of resilience, that are very, very illustrative. The question is that if you do not adapt, the economic cost of not adapting will be higher than the one of adapting. And then as the challenge, let's say the sea level rise, increase of storms is not an accurate forecast, we have to move in a risk assessment contingency, monitor and take lessons in order to be facing the investment so the investment makes sense. So you can realize that your investment is producing savings really in the balance. So adaptation is a need because adaptation is business at present.
Mr. Francisco?
Yeah?
Are you listening? Oh, sorry. Just your scene here. I think that there's some problem with the internet connection.
Yes.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am listening now.
Okay. Well, we are already in the final part of our webinar, and just for our closing of those subjects, during this webinar, you have told us about some important lessons that the coronavirus outbreak are given to us. One of them, as you already told us, about the importance of resiliency. We have to be prepared to adapt and also to return to our operations fastly.
Yeah.
Another one is the importance of the digitalization and automation, especially in the post-crisis scenario. What are other lessons that you point that the COVID outbreak, the COVID pandemic, has learned to us?
Well, mainly it's, of course, the need for cooperation. Ports cannot tackle challenges like this alone. They have to provide to society part of their ability to in the supply of cargoes, and they have at the same time to receive health services, coordination services, and also, let's say, support from the civil emergency systems to cope with everything. That at the very end is the pure concept of resilience applied to the full society. And I think the way ahead is not all written at present in this present stage of the crisis. So I think the next steps are collecting all available information, made a deep analysis, join experts, and develop guidelines and best practice for adapting to this kind of threats to our society, and also provide resilience ahead of them. This is typically a collaborative job that will take a long time after. We need all agents that are involved, the ports, authorities, consultants, contractors, dredging companies, associations of ports, as IAPH, that's a sister association of PIANC. We work together in many topics in sustainability on maritime ports. And it's a clear topic of that needs, after the crisis, we need a lot of reflection, a lot of opinion exchange, a lot of knowledge in order to articulate the toolbox for the ports being able to solve and to tackle with this kind of threats.
And based on what we're saying, I think that it won't be hard to imagine that PIANC will have a future report about all that scenario and its main lessons for us, isn't it?
Well, the first reaction when this started and the ports started to experience disruptions, firstly, the IAPH, through the World Port Sustainability Program, started the surveys, and they started to inform of what was happening, collecting information from the ports. That's an information with a back analysis that's very immediate, weekly reports. Then we had several opinions within PIANC, said we have to do something now. Well, we thought that was not the best option for PIANC. PIANC has to issue guidelines for tackling the problems with a deep foundation and providing tools that are not only suitable for port operators today, but for the port planners of the ports of tomorrow. And that requires just taking a short time, because time is something very important, but taking a short time for having all the information, and obviously we will write on this, we will have a report on this. This has to come from the commissions, but I am sure PIANC will issue one report about pandemics or in general about this type of challenges. And also in our future events, probably we will dedicate specific sessions, well, sure, sessions to this issue.
It cannot be that different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mr. Francisco Esteban Leffler, President of PIANC, I congratulate you. I thank you very much for your participation in this third edition of Portimar 2000 Tribuna Group, and also the name of Tribuna newspaper for your participation. And if you'd like your final comments, please speak.
Well, my final comment is I think we have to take the opportunity of the COVID for having more resilient ports, more resilient and more prepared to extreme events that now even we cannot imagine. So we must think ahead on what challenges can come. Obviously, I want to thank Grupo Tribuna because I'm very honored to have had the opportunity to address this topic. And of course, I am available for all our Brazilian colleagues, for Grupo Tribuna, Port of Santos, and all the Brazilian port systems. Please call me whenever you want, because PIANC is open for you, and PIANC President is also ready just to exchange with you all kind of information and to work together. So I have to thank you very much. I am very honored to having participated in a webinar just organized by a so prestigious group as Tribuna.
No, thank you very much again. All the pleasure and all the honor was ours. Thank you again for your participation. Eu também gostaria o webinar Portimar 2020 com a participação do senhor Francisco Esteban Leffler, presidente da Associação Internacional de Infraestrutura para o Transporte Aquaviário, a PIANC, uma entidade aí centenária e de alcance mundial, debatendo design, planejamento e construção e obras em portos. Muito obrigado à participação de todos e acompanhe nas nossas redes sociais, nos nossos grupos e também no nosso noticiário as novidades da próxima edição do webinar Portimar 2020. Um abraço a todos, boa tarde e cuidem-se.
Boa tarde, muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Francisco. Até mais.